I've found evidence of something rather distressing in my home. There's a very particular state of mind you slip into right before sleep takes hold. It's not dreaming yet, not even fully resting. It's more like hovering at the edge of unconsciousness, while your thoughts turn half-formed, nonsensical, and slippery. You can still notice what's happening around you, the creak of a floorboard, the hum of a fridge, the shuffle of sheets. But you're too detached to do more than register it. By the time your brain says, "that was odd," you're already sliding into sleep. That was the state I was in when all of this began. For context, I live with my wife and our daughter in a fairly ordinary two-story house. My daughter's room is downstairs. My wife and I share a room upstairs just to the right of the staircase. In the years we've been here, I've grown attuned to the household sounds, the different rhythms of footsteps, the groan of specific steps on the stairs, the little household noises you eventually learn to tell apart. I can always tell whether it's my wife or my daughter coming up the stairs. My daughter has a lighter, quicker tread. My wife walks slower, each step landing firmly before the next. It's the kind of distinction you don't think much about until something disturbs it. And that's exactly what happened. One night, while I was lying in bed in that groggy, semi-conscious limbo, I heard someone coming up the stairs. At first, I thought nothing of it. It was late, but maybe my daughter had woken up for water, or my wife had gotten out of bed without me noticing. But when I forced a tiny fraction of my mind to pay attention, I realized neither made sense. My wife was lying right beside me, breathing steadily, and my daughter rarely got up in the middle of the night. The steps weren't hers anyway, and they certainly weren't my wife's. They belonged to someone else. Still, because of the state I was in, I didn't react. I didn't sit up or even open my eyes. Instead, I had one of those strange, fuzzy half-thoughts that make sense only in that drowsy state. Something like, who was that? And then I drifted off again. The same thing happened the following night, and the next. Each time it was the same pattern, a slow, deliberate set of footsteps ascending the stairs. Not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. Then silence. Nothing to follow. No creak of floorboards in the hall, no sound of a door opening, no whisper of movement. Just the steps. It's strange how easily the mind discards things when they happen in that liminal time between wakefulness and sleep. The memory blurred into something dreamlike, so much so that I didn't even think about it during the day. Maybe once or twice the idea flitted through my mind at work, did I really hear something last night, before I dismissed it. By the time evening came, the thought had evaporated. Looking back now, I wish I'd paid more attention. At first, it didn't feel threatening. Odd, sure, but not threatening. I never once thought, we're in danger or someone's broken in. Instead, the whole thing felt like some trivial curiosity I couldn't quite puzzle out. My half-asleep brain treated it like background noise, not a warning. But the more it happened, the more it began to press at the edges of my waking mind. I can't tell you exactly how many nights it took before I started to wonder if it was more than a dream. 4, maybe 5. But eventually, I found myself lying in bed waiting, straining to listen in that fragile window between sleep and wakefulness. And when the steps came, I realized with cold certainty that they were real. They weren't dream sounds. They weren't echoes of imagination. They were heavy, deliberate footsteps on the wooden staircase outside my door. The first time I fully recognized it, I still didn't react. I was frozen by the strangeness of the situation, trapped between the comfort of rationalizing it away and the unease prickling at the back of my neck. My heart beat a little faster, sure, but not from outright fear, more from the dawning realization that something didn't fit. If it wasn't my wife, and it wasn't my daughter, then who was it? I told myself a dozen excuses. Maybe my daughter had restless nights I'd never noticed before. Maybe my wife had gotten up, though I knew I'd felt her beside me the whole time. Maybe old houses just make noises that resemble footsteps if you catch them at the right moment. But none of those explanations settled the unease. I remember lying there one particular night, staring at the ceiling, my wife asleep beside me, when the footsteps came again. Each thump of wood against wood seemed to match the beat of my pulse. I held my breath and counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up. And then silence. No door creaking, no retreat, no continuation, just gone. That silence unnerved me more than the steps themselves. Whoever or whatever was walking up the stairs seemed to stop just outside our room. By the end of that week, my subconscious dismissal began to crumble. I started to actually think about it during the day, replaying the sounds in my head, trying to picture what could cause them. I felt ridiculous, as though I was assigning meaning to some meaningless creaks in the night. Still, I couldn't shake it. I didn't talk to my wife about it at first. I wasn't sure how to even phrase it without sounding like a child describing monsters in the dark. I kept it to myself, half out of embarrassment, half out of a lingering disbelief that there was anything worth talking about at all. But then something small shifted. At work, one of my coworkers mentioned a strange dream they'd had, laughing about how nonsensical it was. The casual remark triggered something in me, made me really remember those nights of hearing the steps. Suddenly, it wasn't just a hazy, sleep-blurred impression. It was a pattern, a consistent occurrence that happened enough times to carve itself into my memory. That's when the curiosity really took hold. Instead of dismissing it, I started to analyze it in my head. What were the possible explanations? What could I do to prove or disprove that it was real? Should I test it somehow? Maybe stay awake one night just to see? The idea both unnerved me and intrigued me. I tried to laugh it off the way my coworker had with their dream, but it lingered. That night, as I climbed the stairs to bed, I paused at the top and glanced back down the darkened stairwell. The house was still. My wife was already in bed, my daughter asleep in her room. Everything was ordinary. And yet, as I slid under the covers, I couldn't help but wonder if, in a few short hours, I'd hear those phantom footsteps again. After that conversation at work, I couldn't quite shake the thought anymore. It lodged itself in the back of my mind like a splinter, small but persistent, catching on everything. For the first time, I didn't dismiss the footsteps as a dream or a trick of my half-asleep mind. I acknowledged them as real. And with that acknowledgement came a kind of restless curiosity. For years, I'd known the sounds of our home, my daughter's hurried steps, my wife's slower ones, the occasional creaks of pipes at night. These new footsteps didn't belong to any of them. I replayed the rhythm of it in my mind during the day, how evenly spaced it was, how steady. They weren't the hurried scurries of someone sneaking, and they weren't the heavy tread of someone trying to intimidate. They were calm, methodical, like someone who belonged there. That was the part that unsettled me most. I told myself that if it happened again, I'd stay awake. I'd force myself to listen, not let sleep swallow me before I could make sense of it. I didn't tell my wife, not yet. I figured she'd laugh, or worse, dismiss it entirely and leave me feeling like I'd imagined the whole thing. So, I made a plan. I went to bed earlier than usual, forcing myself to keep my eyes closed but my mind alert. I lay there listening to my wife's breathing settle into the deep rhythm of sleep, the quiet of the house pressing in from all sides. And then I waited. Minutes crawled by. I lost track of how long I stayed like that, holding my breath at every tiny creak of the house, wondering if this would be the moment. My body wanted desperately to sink into sleep, to drift off like always, but I fought it, clinging to wakefulness. Finally, after what felt like hours, I heard it. The first step creaked, faint but distinct. Then the second. My heart thudded. One by one, the steps ascended, climbing toward the landing outside our bedroom. Slow, steady, familiar now. I held my breath so hard it hurt, straining to hear any variation, anything that might reveal who or what it was. And once again, the sound stopped at the top of the stairs. That silence pressed down like a weight. I kept waiting for more, for the soft scuff of feet in the hallway, the groan of a floorboard, even a whisper of movement. Nothing came. It was as if whoever had climbed the stairs simply vanished the second they reached the top. I stayed rigid in bed, eyes wide open in the dark, convinced that if I so much as twitched, something would notice. Minutes dragged past before exhaustion overpowered fear, and I slipped into sleep despite myself. When morning came, everything looked the same. The hallway outside was empty, no doors ajar, no signs that anyone had been there at all. For a while, I tried to laugh at myself. Maybe I was just spooking myself into hearing things. Maybe houses did make noises that resembled footsteps when you were half gone with sleep. But deep down, I knew better. The footsteps came again the next night, and the night after that. It became a pattern. Each evening, I would go to bed already anticipating them. My wife noticed how restless I was, how I shifted and sighed before sleep, but I brushed it off as stress from work. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth, not when I was still not sure what the truth was. The regularity of it disturbed me. Always around the same time, always the same measured rhythm, always stopping at the top of the stairs. I began to notice something else too. On nights when I forced myself to stay awake and listen, the air itself seemed to change when the steps began. The silence in the house grew heavier, thicker, as though the world was holding its breath along with me. Even the usual nighttime noises, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the pipes, seemed to fade away while the footsteps lasted. It was like the house itself was listening. By the end of the week, my denial was wearing thin. I found myself distracted at work, staring into space, thinking about the sound of those steps. I'd catch myself glancing toward the stairwell when I passed it in the evening, a tightness settling in my chest at the thought of climbing them myself. One afternoon, as I sat at my desk, the whole thing slipped out in conversation. A coworker was telling us about some bizarre dream they'd had, laughing about how random it was, and before I realized it, I blurted something about hearing footsteps at night. I didn't go into detail, just said I'd been half asleep and thought I'd heard someone on the stairs. Everyone chuckled, threw out their own anecdotes about hearing weird things when tired, and the subject moved on quickly. But inside me, something shifted. Saying it out loud, even lightly, made it more real. That was the moment I stopped treating it like a dream. That evening, when I got home, the thought clung to me. At dinner, while my daughter chattered about her day, while my wife asked me about work, I kept glancing at them both, studying their faces, wondering if either of them ever heard what I did. Finally, after we'd cleared the dishes, I asked them, "Hey," I said casually, too casually, "do either of you ever get up at night? Like walk around, maybe go upstairs?" My daughter shook her head immediately. "No. Why?" My wife frowned at me. "Not really. I mean, sometimes I go to the bathroom, but I don't go downstairs if that's what you mean. What's this about?" I hesitated. "Nothing. Just thought I heard something the other night. Must have been the house." She shrugged, accepting that explanation without much thought, and the conversation moved on. But the way they answered, quickly, without hesitation, made my stomach twist. They hadn't been the ones I was hearing, which meant someone else was. From that point forward, I started thinking about what to do. I didn't really believe it was an intruder. If someone had managed to get into the house, surely they'd have left other signs, moved objects, opened doors, disturbed something. And what kind of intruder did nothing but climb the stairs and vanish into silence? Still, I knew I needed proof, something more solid than my own half-asleep ears. I thought about old stories, like that one from the Bible where a man spread flour on the floor to catch footprints. I imagined doing the same, sprinkling powder on the staircase to see if something marked it. I even considered stringing some kind of tripwire, though I quickly realized how impractical that was. Eventually, I landed on something simpler. Recording. I had an old phone sitting in a drawer, outdated and disconnected, but still functional. I decided I'd use it to record audio through the night. If the footsteps were real, I'd capture them. If they weren't, maybe I could finally put my mind at ease. It was a plan that felt small, harmless, like an experiment. At the time, I didn't realize just how much it would change everything. That night, I set up the phone on the dresser across from the bed, opened the voice recording app, and hit record. The little red line started tracing its way forward, documenting every sound. I told myself I'd check it in the morning, maybe laugh at myself for wasting my time. But deep down, a part of me felt uneasy, like I was opening a door I wouldn't be able to close. I climbed into bed beside my wife, listening to her shift into sleep, and stared at the faint glow of the recording screen until my own eyes finally closed. I didn't know it yet, but that decision marked the beginning of the end of my comfortable explanations. The morning after setting the recorder, I forgot about it entirely. That might sound ridiculous considering how obsessed I'd been the night before, but that's the truth of it. I woke up groggy, went through the usual routine, shower, breakfast, work clothes, rushing out the door, and the phone on the dresser didn't even register in my mind. It wasn't until I was already halfway to the office that I remembered it, the image of that glowing red line suddenly flashing in my head. I cursed under my breath. There was no way I had time to turn around without being late. The thought of the recorder running endlessly crossed my mind, but I told myself it would be fine. It wasn't like the old phone had any important data on it. At worst, it would fill itself up and stop. All day, the thought of it nagged at me. Not in a panicked way, just a low hum of anticipation I couldn't ignore. Every spare moment at work, my brain drifted back to that dresser in the bedroom, the phone quietly documenting hours of silence and, maybe, just maybe, catching the thing I'd been hearing all week. By the time I got home, the anticipation had sharpened into a kind of excitement. Not fear. Not yet. Just curiosity with a nervous edge. I barely greeted my wife and daughter when I walked through the door. After mumbling a quick hello, I headed straight upstairs, my pulse quickening as I pushed open the bedroom door. There it was, the phone, still sitting where I'd left it, screen dark. I picked it up and checked the app. It was still running. 16 hours of audio. For a moment, I wondered if I'd even be able to sift through that much, but then I remembered the sound I was hunting for. Footsteps. Distinct. Rhythmic. I could skip through stretches of silence until I found them. I sat down on the edge of the bed, thumbed the screen, and started listening. Most of the recording was exactly what I expected. Quiet. The soft hum of the house, the occasional rustle of sheets as my wife or I shifted in bed. I skipped forward by minutes at a time, letting the playhead jump through the long stretches of nothingness. The sound didn't distort or blur. It was crisp, every little creak and sigh captured in detail. And then finally, I heard them. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Exactly the way I'd remembered them. I froze, every muscle in my body tightening as I listened. They started near the bottom of the stairs, one by one, then ascended steadily until they reached the landing outside the bedroom. Then, silence. I stared at the phone in my hand, my heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. It was real. No dream, no trick of exhaustion. The recorder had captured it. For a moment, all I felt was vindication, relief even. I hadn't been imagining it. I wasn't losing my mind. There really had been someone, or something, moving through the house at night. But as the realization settled, the relief curdled into unease. Because if it wasn't a dream, then what was it? I should have stopped there, should have shut the phone off, shoved it in a drawer, and let the mystery rot in the dark. But I didn't. Instead, I kept skipping forward, curious to see if the steps came back again later in the night. That's when I stumbled on something I wasn't supposed to hear. It happened by accident. I'd overshot a section of silence and let the recording play for a few extra seconds. At first I thought it was nothing, just faint rustling, but then I recognized the sound. Footsteps again. But these weren't the ones I was expecting. They weren't slow and unfamiliar. They were mine. I didn't realize it at first. Why would I? I'd never actually heard myself walk up the stairs before. I was the one making the sound, not hearing it from a distance. But the rhythm, the weight, the way the old wood groaned under my step, it all clicked in a way I can't explain. I knew. The sound on the recording, captured as I went upstairs to retrieve the phone that evening, was identical to the mysterious footsteps from the nights before. Exactly identical. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the wall as the recording played in the background. It didn't make sense. How could I be hearing myself before I was there? How could the same sound exist twice, once in the dead of night, and again when I climbed the stairs in the morning? The thought made my skin crawl. I replayed both sections back to back. First the phantom footsteps from the middle of the night, then the ones of me coming upstairs. The sameness was undeniable. Same weight, same rhythm, same creak of the wood. It wasn't just similar, it was perfect. My breath grew shallow. 100 possibilities flickered through my head, none of them sticking. Maybe the recorder had glitched somehow, replayed sounds from earlier. But no, these weren't recycled. The timing was different. The recording was clean, linear, unbroken. So what was it? I don't remember how long I sat there, playing those sections over and over, my wife and daughter downstairs unaware that something in our home was wrong. My mind churned, circling the same impossible thought again and again. I had been hearing myself. The idea was absurd, terrifying in its absurdity. Footsteps that mimicked mine exactly. Not my wife's, not my daughter's, not an intruder's. Mine. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't relax. Every creak of the house sent my pulse racing. When the phantom footsteps finally came again just past midnight, I nearly bolted upright. I didn't. I stayed frozen, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight, listening as I climbed the stairs and stopped just outside our room. The silence that followed was unbearable. And for the first time since it all began, I realized something I hadn't let myself think before. Whoever, or whatever it wasn't just passing by. It was stopping outside our door. Stopping right there, as if it were waiting. After listening to the recording that afternoon, something inside me shifted. It wasn't a gradual change anymore, like the slow slide from curiosity into unease over the previous week. This was sharp, immediate. The sound of those footsteps, the sound of me, had cut through the last layers of rationalization I'd been hiding behind. All night at work, I'd thought about the recording with an almost giddy anticipation. I'd wanted proof. Well, now I had it, and it felt like poison in my hands. I didn't mention it to my wife or my daughter. How could I? What would I even say? Hey, I recorded someone walking up the stairs last night, and it sounds exactly like me even though I was asleep at the time. Saying it out loud would make it real. Saying it out loud might make them look at me like I'd lost my mind. So I kept it to myself. But the knowledge sat there in my chest, like a stone, heavy and cold. That evening, I went through the motions of normal life, dinner, dishes, small talk, while my thoughts spun around the recording. Every time my daughter laughed, every time my wife asked me a question, I had to force myself to respond normally, to keep from staring at the staircase like it was a loaded gun. When bedtime came, I lingered in the bathroom longer than usual, brushing my teeth slowly, watching my reflection in the mirror. The tiredness in my face was obvious, but beneath it was something else, a flicker of wariness, a look I didn't recognize as my own. When I finally climbed into bed, my wife was already asleep. The old phone sat on the dresser again, its screen glowing faintly as the recorder ran. This time, though, I wasn't planning to forget about it in the morning. I lay there in the dark, eyes wide open, heart hammering, waiting. The house settled around me. The usual sounds of night hummed faintly, the fridge cycling, the soft tick of the clock on the nightstand. I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds in my head. And then, sometime after midnight, the footsteps began. I heard the first creak of the lower step and felt my whole body go rigid. 1 step. 2. 3. They ascended steadily, unhurried, unafraid. By the time they reached the landing, my throat was dry. I didn't move, didn't even blink. They stopped just outside our door and stayed there. The silence stretched on and on. I could almost feel something on the other side of the wood, listening, waiting. My skin crawled. I wanted to reach for my wife to wake her up, but some part of me was afraid to move, afraid to make a sound. Instead, I lay there, every nerve straining, my mind conjuring images of someone or something standing just beyond the door. I don't know how long it stayed there. A minute? 5? More? Eventually, the weight of it lifted. The silence became just silence again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn finally crept through the window, I sat up and turned off the recorder with shaking hands. My wife stirred but didn't wake. I slipped out of bed, went downstairs, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing while my coffee got cold. Something was in our house, and it was starting to feel like it was aware of me. That morning, I considered telling my wife everything, but as soon as she walked into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes, something in me froze. She looked so normal, so unbothered. I couldn't bring myself to drop this thing on her. Instead, I said nothing. At work, I couldn't concentrate. My hands trembled as I typed. My mind kept replaying the sound of the footsteps. No, of my footsteps, on that recording. I kept thinking of the silence outside the door, the sense of presence pressing in. By the end of the day, I'd made up my mind. Recording audio wasn't enough anymore. If I wanted answers, I needed to see it. That night, I dug an old webcam out of a box in the closet. It was ancient, the kind you clipped to the top of a monitor, but it still worked. I plugged it into my laptop and set it up facing the staircase from the bedroom door. The grainy preview showed the top few steps and the landing. It would have to do. I positioned the laptop so the screen wouldn't glow, started the recording software, and closed the lid partway to dim it. Then I lay down again, the old phone still running its audio recorder on the dresser, the webcam's tiny red light blinking like a heartbeat. This time, I wasn't drifting in and out of sleep. I was awake, alert, waiting. The footsteps came later than usual that night. I'd been laying there for hours, my wife snoring softly beside me, when the first creak sounded from below. My pulse spiked instantly. Step by step, they ascended again. Calm, deliberate. I turned my head slightly toward the door, my eyes wide open, straining to hear anything beyond the creaks. When they reached the landing, they stopped. I could feel it on the other side. The air in the room felt thicker, heavier, like the moment before a storm breaks. My chest rose and fell in shallow, quiet breaths. I thought I heard a faint exhale from beyond the door, then nothing. Silence. The weight of it pressed down until I couldn't stand it. I sat up, slowly, careful not to wake my wife. The The glow of the webcam's light blinked steadily at the door. I reached out and touched the knob. It was cold. I didn't turn it. I didn't open the door. I just sat there with my hand on the knob, frozen, until finally the heaviness lifted again and the house returned to its usual night sounds. I eased back into bed, my whole body trembling. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was fear. When morning came, I checked the laptop first. The webcam had recorded all night without issue. I opened the file and scrubbed through the footage. Most of it was just what you'd expect: stillness, darkness, a grainy view of the stairs. Then, around the time I'd heard the footsteps, something flickered at the bottom of the frame. Not a shape, not exactly. More like a brief distortion, as if the pixels themselves had warped for a second. Then the top step creaked. No visible figure, no movement, but the step depressed slightly, the wood flexing under an invisible weight. One by one, the stairs moved. No one there, but the wood gave. The carpet compressed as if someone unseen were climbing. By the time it reached the landing, my heart was in my throat. The landing itself seemed to darken for a moment, a faint shadow where no shadow should be. Then it was gone. The rest of the video showed nothing but stillness. I sat back from the laptop, my hands shaking. It wasn't just footsteps anymore. It wasn't just sound. Something unseen was moving through our house. And whatever it was, it walked exactly like me. That night, as I set up the equipment again, my wife rolled over and mumbled, "What are you doing?" I froze. "Nothing," I whispered. "Go back to sleep." She did. I stared at the door, waiting for the steps. This time, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear them at all. The next day, I felt like I was carrying a secret that was eating me alive. At breakfast, my daughter asked if we could have pancakes this weekend. I nodded absently, forcing a smile, but my mind was still on the recording, on the sight of those steps flexing beneath nothing, on the shadow at the landing. I told myself I wouldn't look at the footage again, that watching it once was enough, that some things weren't meant to be picked apart and studied. But as soon as the house was empty, I found myself opening the file again, and there it was, unchanged. The stairs shifting as though under my own weight, the invisible presence climbing closer, closer until it stood outside the door. I paused it there. The grainy still frame of the landing filled my laptop screen. Nothing visible, just that faint, unnatural darkness pooling against the carpet. It felt like staring at a wound. That night, I decided not to set up the webcam. I told myself it was because the old laptop fan was too loud, that it might wake my wife. But the truth was, I didn't want more proof. The audio recorder was enough. I placed the phone on the dresser like before, then lay back in bed, eyes open, waiting. The house grew still. Hours passed. And then, the first step creaked. I squeezed my eyes shut. I couldn't bear to see the knob turn, couldn't bear to watch the door move. Instead, I lay frozen as the footsteps climbed again, slow and deliberate. When they reached the landing, they stopped, just as they always did. But this time, something new happened. The knob turned. It didn't open. The latch held, but the metal shifted under some invisible hand, rattling faintly in the quiet. I couldn't breathe. My chest ached with the effort of holding still. After a long, agonizing moment, the knob released. The silence pressed in again. Eventually, the weight lifted, and the night returned to its usual rhythm. I didn't sleep. Not a single second. The next morning, I opened the recording with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold the phone. I fast-forwarded through hours of empty static until the moment I remembered, the creak of the first step. The sound was clear, crisp. Step, step, step. Each one was followed by the faint, steady rhythm of breathing. Not just any breathing, mine. I listened harder, leaning close to the speaker. The pitch, the cadence, the slight rasp I developed from years of smoking in my 20s, it was all there. The breathing was me. The footsteps were me. It was as though I had recorded myself walking while I slept. But I hadn't. I couldn't have. I rewound it again and again, playing the section back until the noise became unbearable. Finally, I threw the phone onto the bed and buried my face in my hands. There was no way to deny it anymore. Whatever was in my house wasn't just imitating me, it was me. Or at least some reflection, some echo. The thought wouldn't leave me. All day at work, it circled in my head like a vulture. It's you. It's you. It's you. I thought about telling my coworker, but when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. How could I possibly explain? He'd think I was insane. maybe I was. That night, I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the door. I didn't even bother with the recorder. Proof didn't matter anymore. I already knew what I would find. I just needed to know why. So I stayed awake, waiting. The house grew still. My wife shifted in her sleep. My daughter's faint music played from her room down the hall. And then it came. The first step. My skin prickled. Second step. Third. They climbed higher, closer. The sound so eerily familiar, I felt like I was listening to a recording of myself played back in real time. At the landing, the steps stopped. The silence thickened. And then, from just beyond the door, I heard a whisper. A single word. My name. It was my own voice. Perfectly. Exactly. Like listening to a playback of myself speaking, only there was no recording running. No device. Just the sound of me calling myself from the other side of the door. I felt my stomach turn cold. My hand moved toward the knob without thinking. When I touched it, it was warm. Not cold this time. Warm. Like a hand was already there, waiting for mine. I jerked back, heart pounding. My wife stirred beside me and muttered something incoherent, but didn't wake. The silence stretched on. And then, slowly, the weight lifted again. The house returned to stillness. But the warmth on the knob lingered against my skin long after. The next day, I didn't bother going to work. I couldn't. I stayed home moving through the house like a ghost, jumpy at every creak and hum. By evening, I'd made my mind up. I needed to know what would happen if I opened the door. That night, I waited again. The footsteps came. One by one, they ascended, steady and patient. When they reached the landing, I rose from the bed, careful not to wake my wife. The knob trembled faintly, rattling in its socket. I reached out. My fingers closed around the metal. This time, I didn't hesitate. I turned it and opened the door. The landing was empty, but the stairs were not. Descending, slow and deliberate, was me. Not just a shadow, not just a distortion. It was my face, my body, my exact reflection, moving down the steps in reverse. Its eyes met mine as it went, and I felt a cold wave of recognition crash through me. It smiled. My smile. And then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness below. I don't remember what happened after that. I must have closed the door, crawled back into bed, pulled the covers over my head like a child. Because when I woke in the morning, everything was as it should be. My wife making coffee, my daughter asking about pancakes, except for me. I didn't feel like myself anymore. I still don't. Sometimes when I walk up the stairs at night, I hear the steps echo back at me, perfectly in sync, like someone is climbing right beside me. And sometimes when I pass the mirror in the hallway, I swear it smiles a second too late.